Okay, well, I thought it would be useful to just, now that we've had the basic introduction, to do a fairly simple workflow just to extract a couple different kinds of features, just to show you how all these techniques that we were looking at in the last video can actually be applied to a specific problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to zoom into an area. This is actually a pretty big area, so we wouldn't typically process the entire image, because what we would do is we target a specific smaller area with some features that we were interested in delineating more clearly. So we would zoom in, we'd crop out everything else, and we would do some of those procedures to just enhance our image so that those features become more clear, more delineated. So what we're going to do is we're going to zoom into this area that I showed earlier that's right in the middle of all these really nice fields. And cleared fields are fantastic areas to do satellite imagery processing or aerial imagery processing, because especially at this time of year, this is like early spring, all the soil's nice and moist. The crops aren't particularly high, but they're there, and they're kind of showing some sort of glimpse as to what might be underneath the surface, right? So this is a really great area to apply some of our techniques. Desert areas are also really fantastic. Anywhere where you can really see the dirt and get an impression for what's buried inside of it. So this is the area I was sort of showing earlier in the last video. I'll zoom in just actually a little bit more here, where there are some features out here in this particular field. These may be Bronze Age tumuli, they may be Roman burials. I know there's Roman stuff out into this area here, and when we did our field walking out here, we noticed this stuff and we recorded it, but we weren't entirely sure what it was. In fact, when we were out there walking, it wasn't as clear as it is on this particular image. So we're going to do two kind of sets of operations. One will be to try and make these features here in the field a little bit more clear, and the other will be to sort of delineate these roads and stuff, because that's also something that's useful to do. And we're going to need two kind of separate workflows to do that, because they're two kind of separate styles of features. These roads and the walls of the compound here are really sharp. The edges are really sharp because they're modern features. These, on the other hand, are a little less clear. They're a little more difficult to separate from the background image. So we're going to have to do something a little different to do those. So what we're going to do is start with this sort of more clear features here, and we'll just sort of go through a general workflow. And again, I don't want you to get the impression that you have to follow exactly these steps. There is definitely a little bit of an art. Again, this is qualitative image analysis, so you're going to use your eye and your intuition, and you're going to do some experiments. You're just going to fool around with some of the values to see what works the best. So the first thing I'm going to do, we're actually going to go over to this menu that we haven't really been looking at over here. We're going to grab the rectangular select tool, and we're just going to use this to draw a box in the area that we want to do our work. So we really only care about this area right here, more or less. And we want to crop everything out. And so what we're going to do is go to Image and then Crop to Selection. And there, boom. So now what we've done is really just gotten rid of a bunch of data, and when we do all of our contrast stretching and our edge detection and all of this kind of stuff, we're just limiting it to this area. This is a really good time to go ahead and save the project as a new GIMP XCF file. In this case, farm field zoom in, right? Remember, this is the XCF file. This is not an image file. This is just a little set of instructions, right, for all the operations that we're going to do. Okay, so we've got our zoom in, our crop file. We've saved it out. I always like to start with either levels or curves. Let's just do the basic levels adjustment here. So we stretch our histogram from the right and the left, the dark and the light, until we get something that looks pretty good. Remember, we're looking at these features over here and this feature here to sort of, let's see, maybe I move this back, black point back just a little bit. And so again, this is where the sort of qualitative artistic, you just do it until those features seem to pop out a little bit more at you. And click OK. Alright, so what I've got here is I basically increased the contrast a little bit. And again, remember, we're looking at the roads first, and then we'll look at these things second. So, okay, that's all looking pretty good to me right now. In fact, what I might do, since we really want those roads to kind of pop out, is actually just use the built-in contrast tool. And this can be achieved with the curves and the levels, but having a sort of dedicated, just one slider makes it slightly easier for us. Yeah, something like that, I think. Let's see if I can make things just a little brighter. And what we want to do is to make the contrast between the dark and the light more extreme. That way the edge detection routine that we're going to put over it will work better. Okay, so that's pretty good here. And at this point, what I'm going to do is to desaturate the image, turn it into a grayscale image. I'm going to use the desaturate tool because it just gives me a little bit more flexibility. So I can just get one of these three options. And again, I'm looking for sort of contrasty, and I kind of like luminosity in this particular endeavor. So good. So here we are. We're ready for our edge detection routine, which will hopefully delineate some of these roads and boundaries. And so remember, that's under our filter and edge detect. And I'll show you what a couple of these things are. So let's go with our difference of Gaussians. Now, what I like to do is, if I'm looking at particularly, let's say, at this compound, I like to put my little dialog next to it. And I grab this little, see this little four-way arrow, and actually lets me move my preview window to show me essentially the part of the image that I'm kind of interested in, right? So this is corresponding to this. And so now what I can do is to play with my parameters over here until I get a kind of nice preview. So going up really big for the second radius doesn't really look very good. So if I take it down real small, so it looks pretty good. So if I just click OK, and we'll just get a preview of what that might look like. Alright, that really pops the walls of this particular compound out right here. So we may come back to that. I'm just going to hit undo. I'm going to try another edge detect. I'm going to try the Laplacian edge detect. Now this was going to make sort of an inverted thing, and it's not really tunable, so you sort of get what you want, and get what you get with it, and you kind of have to live with that if you want. One thing that you might want to do after you do is just hit invert from the colors, and it will look very similar to what we had before. Actually, I don't like the way that looks. I think the other one did better. We have one more that we can try. Let's just try the basic edge detect here, Sol algorithm, and we can actually change here a variety of things. So we can try Laplacian, we can try some of these other methods, and just see if any of them actually look a little bit better than okay, again, I should have actually moved this to the place that we're trying to do the edge detection for. You know, that's actually pretty good. Let's just see what happens if we go through at a different level. We'll go back to that. Actually, so I think that looks pretty good here. So let's do that and let's just see. And let's invert our colors again. Well, no, that makes it a little more difficult with all this stuff here. So I'm just going to undo, and I think probably the difference of Gaussians was the best. We can try one more thing before we do our edge detect. We can actually do a sharpening, right? So we can do our, where's our unsharp mask over here? And again, we're going to move our preview window to the area that we're kind of interested in. And sharpening may actually increase local contrast a little bit, and may actually end up getting us a better edge detection. So you see how it's definitely, everything is, the local contrast between black and white has been increased. So let's now try again our edge detect, or difference of Gaussians, since that was our best the last time. So we still have our preview window, and if we just increase our window, we might get slightly bolder. But again, we'll have a bit more noise out here, but that's okay. We'll click OK, and there we go. Yeah, I think that's pretty good for now. And what we can do at this point is to actually apply a threshold. So we can turn that into a true binary black and white. Remember, if I took this from the other side, unfortunately it's going to make everything black like that. So what you're basically doing is moving the point, and you're trying to balance getting the lines dark enough without having a bunch of extra noise in there, because we need to have the lines fairly thick, because what we can do is again apply an erode, which will get rid of some of the smaller areas automatically and sort of fine up the details on our outlines here. So we'll go back to our filter and we'll go to our generic. And remember, they have the names mixed up, so where it says dilate is actually going to do an erode. That's actually too much. We got rid of too much of our stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my threshold, and I'm actually going to apply a slightly lighter threshold, something like that. That's pretty good. Everything's pretty clean. Let's say I'm really only interested in the walls of this compound. What I can do at this point is to pick my eraser tool over here, just making sure that when I do it, let's see, yeah, actually, so I got my brush. I want to pick a solid brush. I want to make the size of the brush pretty big. Whoa, that's too big. Somewhere in here and there. Now I can just sort of go fairly quickly around the outside. Oops. If I mess up, I can always hit Control Z. Being fairly careful when I get close. Every time I do this, I'm just waiting. I click once, right? I'm going to clear up some of this stuff around here. And pretty rapidly, you can see I've kind of cleaned up a lot of the extra stuff, right? Okay, so let's just make my brush a little smaller. We'll clean up the inside of the compound here. You know, I'm doing this fairly rapidly. You would take a little bit more time before you did this, before you finish. But basically, at the end, what you want is essentially just to have those lines of the area that you're interested in, and to have not very much of this extra stuff. At this point, what we can do is we can go File, Export, or Export As, Field Zoom PNG, and hit Export. That's fine. And now we have a separate little image over here. I'll show you just very briefly. If I go, let's see, to my file where I exported this thing, which unfortunately I've got buried deep in here. This thing right here. I'll open it up with another piece of software, actually called Inkscape. I'll just start here. We didn't talk about this last time. This is something a little added value. I'm just going to show you a neat trick that you can do. This is a vector drawing graphic tool. And if we open up our raster image, this is bitmap image, in Inkscape over here, so let's just see if it shows up in my recent. There we go. And we see our little outline here. There's actually a really cool extension here, and let's see if I can find where it is. Let's see, where is it? Image effects. No, that's not where it is. Yeah, right here. Object to path, and it will actually. Where is it? Oh, trace bitmap. That's what I wanted here. It will actually trace this this raster into a vector image that you could bring into and manipulate the drawings of. So let's just mess around with this real quick. What we would do, let's see, edge detection, and bring the colors down to just 1, and let's see if we can do this real quick. Actually, let's try brightness threshold, and let's do live preview. Oh, okay, I should have selected the image. That's why it's not doing anything. Okay, there we go. So we click OK, and what we've done is to trace our bitmap image into a vector image. And if I double click on the new thing, you can see I can actually go in here and I can manipulate this just like I could any vector image. And I can remove all my little dangles. I can, using the sort of select tool, Control-G to break them all apart. And I can I can delete individual nodes, that kind of stuff. So this is sort of a separate issue over here. But the point is that this is a really cool way to automatically trace the edges that you've detected. Okay, so I'm going to close Inkscape and go back to GIMP. I'm going to do, let's see if I can go back to the undo history, and let's see if I can go all the way back to the beginning. Okay, base image, there, boom. So undo history just shows you a list of all the things that you've done, all your operations. It's kind of a useful thing to sort of follow what you've done to manipulate your image. We'll just go back here so we see the layer dialog again. Now we're going to focus actually on this area here. And in fact, what you might even want to do to make your life easier is just even zoom in just to that area and crop again. Crop to selection. And then we can zoom in to that area here. Okay, so now what we really want to do is to make these things pop. And I'll tell you right now, edge detection is not going to work real well in this situation, because you see the sort of difference between this color and that color, or the luminance value or whatever it is, not particularly extreme. Instead, what we're going to want to do, we're going to mess around with the contrast, and then we'll just use the threshold tools to sort of highlight these areas. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to do curves this time, just to show you a slightly separate way of doing it. So remember, if I pull down from this area, what I'm doing is making the darkers dark. And if I pull up from this area, I'm making the light colors a little light. So by doing this, pulling down and pulling up, I'm doing a contrast enhancement. And I can mess around with my middle point like this. In fact, what I kind of want to do is enhance the light areas a little bit more, and maybe even pull the darks down. So I really want to do is to just sort of define these whitish areas and separate them from their background colors here. And let's just pull them up just a little bit more in the middle. Let me pull them up here. Alright, that looks pretty good to me. Okay, so we have a nice contrasty stretch. One thing we could also do is mess around with our basic contrast tool and see, there we go. That looks really good. Okay, so now we have, it's a terrible looking photograph, but it's actually really good for delineating these potential cairns or whatever these actual archaeological features may be. And now what we can do is to get to our threshold tool. And what we can do is actually, in this case, we may be able to pull down from both sides until we can delineate some of those features in the fields a little bit better. Alright, let's see. I'm looking at this area here. Okay. And let's see if I move it back down. Okay, let's see what that does. Yeah, control. So you see this black area right here? That's actually really cool. So it's definitely more messy than the previous edge detect kind of thing that we did. What's really cool is we can also now take our eraser and let's just make the brush a little smaller in this case. We can get rid of the rest of it, the same way we did before. So cleaning up the outside over here by cleaning up the rest of the field like this. And now essentially what we have is a little bit of a map. Again, you would be more careful, where we have this sort of outline of some of these features. And something that we really need to do is to load in, actually what I should have done. Let me just go back a few steps here before that. Alright, now what I should have done is to make a copy, actually, let me cancel that, is to duplicate the layer and essentially operate. So we've already made a copy of this layer here, and we'll do our operations, our thresholding operations on the top layer like this. So again, let's see. Okay, that looks pretty good. And actually, you know what? It may be better in this particular case to not pull the white slider down to do this, and then actually to do an invert at this particular point. Now we have these features mapped pretty well. And what we can do is to go back and forth. You see I'm using these sort of eyes over here to make each layer visible or invisible. And we can use that as a guide. Actually, this does a really good job. You see mapping out all of these features in here like that. And there's a couple of things we can do. We change the opacity of the blend between the two just so we get like an overlay. We can change the blend mode, for example, to enhance the area underneath. Darken only, or actually probably multiply, let's see, or maybe burn, yeah, something like that. I mean, what we're doing is sort of applying our false color burn over the top of it. Yeah, like that. That's pretty good. Or actually, let's see, overlay might work pretty well in this particular case. I mean, we're sort of doing image fusion, a little bit of image math at this point in time. So, and really what we're doing again is we're sort of doing a qualitative analysis, just trying to enhance the patterning that we're seeing below. Okay, most of this stuff is not particularly necessary. Really, this is just sort of guiding you. So if you wanted to make a nice graphic, really, for your paper or something like this. But at this point, now that we have this sort of black and white binary image, I can do what I just did before, which is to, let's say, erase everything else. I can export this. I can draw a quantitative map from this. I can measure potentially the number of pixels that are black, for example, inside of this area, and that has something to do with the size, because each pixel will have a resolution. So if I knew exactly what the resolution of the pixels were, let's say an image J or something like that, I could actually tell you how much area in this field is given over to archaeological remain. And again, at this point, you can export another image, and you can continue your analysis in another piece of software. You could even import this into a GIS and rectify it, geo-rectify it, so that it matches up with your rectified imagery or something in your GIS. Alright, that's what I have for now, just sort of a couple of additional extra operations with a real outcome.